All right, let's dive into something really deep and honestly pretty fascinating. We're going to be exploring that space where ancient Islamic mysticism collides with modern neuroscience. We're looking at a framework that asks a really bold question. Can a spiritual path from centuries ago actually make sense in our scientific age? And that's really the big question we're tackling today, isn't it? Can we take this incredibly profound wisdom, look at it through the lens of modern science, and create something new? Something that speaks to both our spiritual side and our rational, skeptical mind. That is the challenge we're going to unpack. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we've got to demystify Sufism itself, get a handle on where it comes from. Then we'll apply what we're calling a pro-science filter to see how neuroscience shines a light on these practices. That's going to lead us straight into this new idea of BioIslam. From there, we'll compare its goals with the more traditional path, and that will bring us to the big, unanswered question that sits right at the heart of it all. Okay, so first up, demystifying Sufism. Because look, if we're gonna talk about any new take on something, we have to understand the original, right? And this is a path that's just incredibly rich with history and deep psychological insights. The real name for this tradition in Arabic is tasawwuf. And it's so personal, so internal, that it's often said that a true practitioner would never even call themselves a Sufi. They just aren't concerned with the label. And that really gets to the core of it. The goal here isn't just believing things or following a set of rules. It's about seeking a direct, personal, and experiential connection with the divine. It's a topic that's so deep, our source material notes that even scholars find it dauntingly difficult to put into words, because you're trying to describe states of being that are beyond language. Now, it's really important we clear something up right away. For a lot of people, the word Sufism makes them think of saint veneration. But the research is super clear on this. That was a later development, something that became popular centuries after the tradition was founded. The early scholarly foundation, the stuff championed by huge thinkers like the philosopher Al-Ghazali, was all about a tough internal spiritual discipline. It was about deep psychological work, not asking saints for help. So what was the goal then? Well, you can think of it in two steps. The first is a concept called ihsan. This is about learning to truly see the divine, not with your eyes, but with what the texts call a heartfelt imagination. It's about cultivating a constant awareness. And once you have that, the path leads to irfan, or marifa. This is a much deeper kind of knowing. It's a mystical intuition, a gnosis, that goes way beyond just intellectual understanding. The best way to think about it is this. It's the difference between studying a map of a foreign country and actually being there, walking its streets and breathing its air. And this variety of experience means there's no single type of Sufi. The research really breaks it down into 5 main temperaments or personalities. You've got the somber, who are really focused on the tragedy of the world and live a very simple life. Then there are the sober, who are all about finding balance and following religious law. You have the Sama Sufis, think Rumi, who use music and dance to get into these ecstatic states. Then you have the syncretic, who mix traditions. And finally, the secular, which is more of a modern thing, where people use the practices for personal growth, but not necessarily within a religion. The big takeaway here is that people seem to find the path that just fits their personality. All right, section 2, a pro-science filter. So now that we have a feel for traditional tasawwuf, this is where things get really interesting. What happens when we look at all these ancient practices through the lens of modern science? A really useful, if a little unconventional, way to sort these practices is to think of them as uppers and downers. Uppers are all about inducing altered states of consciousness. They're designed to give you a kind of spiritual high, to make you feel awe and joy and a connection to something bigger. Downers, on the other hand, are about that famous Sufi idea of dying before you die. These are practices designed to quiet that noisy ego and the constant hunger for more stuff that drives so much of our lives. And here are a few examples to make it concrete. For the uppers, you have things like zikr, which is that rhythmic, hypnotic chanting, and sama, which uses that incredible music and whirling dance to trigger ecstatic states they call hal or wajd. Then in the downers camp, you find fana, which means annihilation. It's about negating the ego, which then leads to baka, this amazing state of just being content, subsisting in the divine alone. And from a scientific view, this totally makes sense. The uppers probably fire up feel-good hormones like dopamine, while the downers are designed to cool down the hormones that make us want and crave. So how in the world can these practices have such a huge impact on us? Well, the source material points to this powerful idea from Aldous Huxley, that our brain is basically a reducing valve. Think about it. There's an insane amount of information flooding our senses every second. The brain filters almost all of it out, letting in just a tiny trickle so we can function. From this perspective, mystical practices are just well-honed techniques for prying open that valve, just for a little bit, to experience a much bigger slice of reality. The fancy scientific name for this is transliminality. It's a term from consciousness studies, and it basically measures how easily stuff, thoughts, feelings, images, can cross the line, the limen, between your conscious and your unconscious mind. So you can think of it as how porous your mental filter is. The higher your transliminality, the more open that reducing valve is. And this is where it gets really fascinating. People who naturally have high transliminality, sometimes called thin barrier people, are just psychologically wired for the kinds of experiences Sufism is all about. They get lost in music or nature more easily, they have more vivid imaginations, and they're more open to that feeling of ego dissolution, of feeling connected to everything. This really gives us a scientific hint as to why certain people are just drawn to these paths, while for others, it doesn't click at all. Okay, Section 3, Introducing BioIslam. So we've laid down the basics of traditional Sufism and this scientific idea of transliminality. Now we can finally bring it all together and introduce the main idea of this explainer, BioIslam. So what is BioIslam? Well, at its heart, it's a post-Sufi idea. The goal isn't to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's about approaching this ancient tradition with a critical but respectful eye. It applies this pro-science filter, sifting through the vast library of tasawwuf and keeping the ideas and practices that actually align with what we now know about the brain, psychology, and consciousness. This table really shows you how that filter works in practice. And it's not just a simple yes or no. For example, it sets aside claims of kashf, this idea of a total unveiling of supernatural secrets, not because it says they're false, but because by definition you can't prove or disprove them with science. Same goes for baraka, or blessings from saints, which came later and sometimes led to exploitation. But what's really cool is the reinterpretation. Take fana, ego negation. Instead of trying to destroy the ego, the idea is to recalibrate it. The ego isn't the enemy, it's a vital tool we need, it just needs a tune-up. And then core practices like zikr, the chanting, and fikr, contemplation, are fully embraced, because science is showing us over and over that these things really do reduce stress and create positive emotions. And this approach doesn't just filter things out, it also elevates certain ideas. It really champions something called deep fikr, which is basically science-led contemplation. Think about the feeling of pure awe you get when you watch a show like Cosmos. Now imagine taking that feeling and using it as a launchpad for deep reflection. That's deep fikr. And this can lead to these two incredible emotional states. The first is haiba, that's H-A-B-U, which is that feeling of expansive joy and wonder when you really grapple with the scale of the universe. The second is haira, pronounced H-I-R-A, which is a state of joyful confusion. It's about being okay with both knowing and not knowing, and embracing mystery instead of demanding rigid, certain answers. Section 4, 2 Paths to Escape. Okay, so now that we've defined both the traditional and the post-Sufi paths, let's look at their ultimate goals, because this is where we see a really fundamental difference in how they see the world. Both paths start from the same place. They recognize the world can be a tough, tragic place, and both offer a kind of escape. But the purpose of that escape is totally different. For a lot of traditional mystics, the goal is a permanent, inward retreat from the world, which they see as a distraction. For the post-Sufi, that escape is temporary. It's like plugging your phone into the charger. You escape to recharge, to tap into that deep well of awe and resilience so you can come back and re-engage with the world's problems with more energy and compassion. The traditional goal is just beautifully captured by this image of a quest to pierce the 70,000 veils of light and darkness that are said to stand between us and the divine. And the ultimate goal of that journey is kashf, that complete supernatural unveiling of mysteries we talked about. It's a journey deep, deep inside to find a hidden ultimate truth. And that whole quest for union raises this massive philosophical question that's right at the heart of all mysticism: monism versus dualism. Is God totally separate from creation? That's the dualist view. Or is God somehow in creation, part of its very fabric? That's the monist view. Well, the monist view, which is called wahdat al-wujud, or the oneness of being, was famously articulated by the philosopher Ibn Arabi. And yeah, it was and still is super controversial because it pushes back against mainstream theology. But here's the wild part. From a scientific perspective, this ancient mystical idea sounds a lot like modern physics. The discovery that all matter is just condensed energy, E equals mc squared, points to this deep, fundamental unity in everything. Now, this isn't pantheism, the idea that the universe is God. It's something more subtle called panentheism, the idea that God is in the universe, but also so much more than the universe. You know, the ocean is in every wave, but the ocean is infinitely greater than any single wave. And so, this entire journey, from ancient mysticism all the way to modern science, has brought us right to the edge, to one final, huge, and for now, unanswerable question. And this is it. This is the big one. When someone has one of those profound, transcendent experiences, a feeling of pure unity, of timelessness, of boundless love, what is actually going on? Is it, as a hardcore neuroscientist might say, just a sophisticated trick of the mind? A beautiful illusion created by a cascade of chemicals in the brain? Or is it, as the person experiencing it feels, a real connection, a genuine glimpse of something more, a real moment of closeness with the Creator? The BioIslam position here doesn't pretend to have the answer. Instead, it approaches this incredible mystery with intellectual humility. It basically says, look, the science of consciousness is just getting started. We honestly don't know for sure. And so the goal shifts. It stops being about trying to prove that the mystical experience is supernatural. Instead, it focuses on what we can verify. Using these powerful ancient practices to feel better, to recalibrate our egos, and to live up to our full human potential right here, right now. So we'll leave you with this beautiful paradox that kind of sums up the whole quest. The thing we tell of can never be found by seeking, yet only seekers find it. It suggests you can't force these experiences. You can't just hunt them down. And yet the very act of seeking, of staying curious, of staying open, is what prepares you to receive them. It's a mystery that invites us to keep exploring, not a problem that we have to solve. Thanks for joining us.